Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Corombos of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Hey, really glad you're with us for the Thursday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. We're sorry to say there are no good martinis today, but we do have a lot of important things to talk about. And Jim, we start with how the Biden administration is approaching the Middle East. And as you go from October 7th to the present day, their resolve and their steadfastness on the side of Israel gets smaller and smaller and smaller to pretty much the point where Netanyahu and Biden aren't speaking, and Biden and his team want Israel to kind of ratchet down the war, which is not in the best interest of the Israelis. So now what the Biden administration seems to be doing, Axios with the story here, is that the Biden administration is considering possible recognition of a Palestinian state. It says here that for decades, U.S. policy has been to oppose the recognition of a Palestinian state, both bilaterally and in UN institutions. But now the Biden administration is thinking about connecting it to a normalization of relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which would be significant. And I think the Trump administration was working towards that through the Abraham Accords and so forth. Saudi officials have allegedly made it clear that that can't happen unless there is a Palestinian state. So a lot of different options here, nothing official yet. But Jim, when you think about the behavior in Gaza of Hamas, that's completely unacceptable. And we just talked about how in the West Bank, there was a survey where 0% of the people thought what Hamas did was out of line. So it seems like we're rewarding the worst possible behavior by even thinking about this. But what's your takeaway?
No, I think that's accurate. When this news report broke, let me just say I'm not supposed to talk about what goes on in the National Review company Slack, but a lot of people had vehement reactions to this. It's just very hard to imagine anything that would be more clear as a form of rewarding terrorism, of saying to terrorists, when you do terrible things and you commit massacres, you commit what is effectively a modern pogrom, you kill 1,000 people, we will reward you. We will give you things that you want because you've done that. Which, as everyone knows, that's not only the opposite of deterrence, that is basically creating incentives for more of this. And this is how I approach many issues, including prisoner exchanges and things like that, like that we've seen with Russia. Now, I've heard some people theorize that this is unlikely to come to pass. People know this was, never even really given any serious consideration during the Obama administration. The Obama team would be happy to get there, but they said to the Palestinians, you have to recognize Israel's right to exist. You have to renounce terrorism. You have to renounce ties to terrorist groups, all that kind of stuff. And the Palestinians never came close to taking steps like that. But I've heard some theorization that this is a shot across the bow of Netanyahu. That Biden, who went to Israel shortly after the October 7th attacks and said, we will stand with Israel for as long as it takes, has now reached the point where he's like, no, actually, I don't stand with you anymore. I think it's time for you to wrap this up. I think it's time for you to stop trying to finish off Hamas. It's important that you leave Hamas to come back and attack you another day. This is really turning into a political liability for me, and I'm now putting pressure on you to stop fighting Hamas. Stop trying to kill these guys, even if they're trying to kill you. Obviously, I disagree with that shot across the bow of Netanyahu. The only good news about that interpretation would suggest that this is a less serious proposal than it may initially seem, and that it's really something of a bargaining chip. It's designed to get concessions out of Netanyahu, and that this will be taken off the table. I'd be surprised if it came to pass. That there are few things that I think the Biden administration could do more that would outrage me than to say to Hamas, okay, you did something terrible, we're going to give you something you want. But I guess we'll wait and see. But again, this administration is always thinking about how do we get ourselves out of this news cycle? How do we get ourselves out of this political problem? How do we get Arab Americans who are really upset with this? And we've seen protesters disrupting administration events and political events and fundraisers and stuff like that. This is an administration that always looks at what its political interests are first and the geopolitical consequences second.
Perhaps the most depressing line in this whole thing is that some in the Biden administration are now thinking recognition of a Palestinian state should be the first step in negotiations to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict instead of the last. I really hope you're right that this is a leveraging tool, which I don't like as a leveraging tool either, but I can't believe anybody would actually be that dumb. But this is Washington. They absolutely could be that dumb.
Never say they couldn't be that dumb. Oh, yes, they can.
Yes, they can. Hold my beer. All
As
right,
Obama would say, yes, we can.
For Patriots, find their website, forpatriots.com/martini. I'm telling you, you're going to find fantastic deals there. all the time, from the generators to the survival food kits to stuff that is now your last chance to get a good deal on. Patriot Pure products, for example, the UV phone sanitizer, the UV wand, sanitation solution machine, and the disinfecting power bank. Do you realize how gunky your phone is by how you touch it all day? It's probably one of the most germ-ridden things that you own. So great products, and it's kind of your last chance to get these at a good deal at 4patriots.com/martini. Don't also forget, though, about the best-selling survival food kits designed to last for 25 years. Delicious tasting, got real meat and vegetables, perfect in an emergency if the power is out. Just boil water over a fire, stir in the food kits, simmer, and serve. Visit 4patriots.com/martini to see this week's discounts and deals before they are gone, and get free shipping on orders more than $97. Save more and get peace of mind now by going to the number 4patriots.com/martini. That's 4patriots.com/martini. All right, Jim, staying in Washington, but once again talking about what happened on October 7th, there was a vote in the House of Representatives on something that should be about as blatantly obvious as you can get in a piece of legislation, or at least a resolution of this sort. On Wednesday, there was a vote in the House of Representatives that would ban entry to the United States by members of Hamas or Islamic Jihad, as well as officers of the Palestine Liberation Organization and anyone who participated in the October 7th attacks but is not a member of a recognized terrorist group. Who do you think didn't vote for this one? Yes, Rashida Tlaib of Michigan, Cori of Missouri, perfectly fine with Hamas terrorists coming into the United States. Democrat Delia Ramirez of Illinois voted present, which means she's probably on the side of the other two, but thinks it might actually hurt her politically. So, Jim, they don't get any easier than this if it comes to votes on the House floor, yet they have found a way to once again prove how radical they are.
This is the congressional resolution equivalent of a statement that we should not give whiskey and car keys to teenage boys. And two of them like, nope, I'm not voting for that. And it wasn't even a Ron Paul. There's nothing about the Constitution about giving whiskey and car keys to teenage boys, or there's nothing in the Constitution that says we can't allow Hamas terrorists into here. Not even Ron Paul would say that. Two observations here. One being that, if we're going to impeach Mayorkas, we're going to expel George Santos, believing that we do not have the authority to hold, it wasn't even it was not Palestinians. It was not those suspected of having Hamas ties. It was not those suspected of supporting Hamas or having once ever said something nice about Hamas. No. This was, if you are a Hamas terrorist, the U.S. should not allow you into the country. And these two said no. And as Eats to Pundit used to say, they're not pro-peace, they're pro the other side. I almost want to put forth further resolutions just to see what else you can get them to vote against. Resolve, the House of Representatives states that Vladimir Putin should not be allowed into the country and into the National Archives with a flamethrower. Just see, and I said, nope, we're fine with that. We're good. The other thing somebody observed when this was being discussed on Twitter last night is that life is not always easy for Muslim Americans. You wake up one day and Osama bin Laden has decided he speaks on your behalf, even though you disagree with him on a whole bunch of things. And people look at you with suspicion. People look at you wondering if you have dual loyalties and all kinds of stuff like that. But I'm trying to think, out of all the Muslim American women in the country, the fact that the first two were Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, that's a really bad development. This is like the sort of thing out of a conservative nightmare. And this is the sort of thing that is out of everyone who has ever had a broad-based, fair or unfair suspicion of Muslims. This is the sort of thing they imagine and they envision. And so these two congresswomen are living down to the example, living down to the fears of those who are least inclined to trust Muslims. And it's really bad, but I don't think there'll ever be a consequence. They are both in pretty darn safe districts. There are primary challenges. God bless those primary challenges. There are general election challenges, but I will be surprised. I'll be pleasantly surprised if either one of them ever is voted, leaves Congress involuntarily. Yeah,
I mean, their districts are pretty lopsided. There's been opportunities to challenge Rashida Tlaib in particular in a primary, and it wasn't very close, as I recall. Tlaib with two reasons for not voting for this thing. One, she says it's largely duplicative of existing law. So, pass it again. And then she says the unnecessary bill, because of course race has to enter in here, is just another GOP messaging bill being used to incite anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian, anti-Muslim hatred that makes communities like ours unsafe. Talk about the soft bigotry of low expectations. You can't distinguish between law-abiding, patriotic Muslims or Arabs and the people who commit atrocities. That's on Rashida Tlaib. That's not on the GOP.
I was just about to say, if you're really worried about anti-Muslim, anti-Islam, anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian animus in this country, how do you think voting against this resolution is going to play? What do you think the consequences that's going to be? So, yeah, way to go, Congresswoman.
Amazing. Well, hopefully a little sleep will do some of these people good. It won't do much for Rashida Tlaib. We know what's going on in her mind, unfortunately. But if you need sleep, Magnesium Breakthrough by BioOptimizers is the way to go. 10% off any order right now at biooptimizers.com/martini. And make sure you use the promo code martini at checkout.
More than 75% of the population is magnesium deficient. And what most people don't know is that even if they're taking a magnesium supplement, they're probably still deficient because they're not getting all 7 forms. But Magnesium Breakthrough is the ultimate way to give your body all 7 forms in one supplement.
Yeah, in addition, it helps to improve digestion, supports muscle recovery, and supports healthy bone density. So overcome the struggle and get the most relaxing sleep ever with Magnesium Breakthrough. Go to biooptimizers.com/martini and enter the promo code martini to get 10% off any order. Again, that's biooptimizers.com/martini. biooptimizers.com/martini. All right, Jim, let's get to this is really a crazy martini, but it's definitely a bad one as well. Certain big cities have certainly seen much higher crime rates over the past few years, and very near us, Washington, D.C. is one of them. The murders last year, I think, were the highest since the mid to late 90s, and certainly way higher than they were a decade or so ago. And then, of course, the biggest scourge is carjacking. And not just in certain neighborhoods, it's happening everywhere downtown, which has a lot of people very, very concerned. There was a former Trump official who was, I believe, shot this week as a result of a carjacking. I think he's going to be okay. But it's happening more and more. We're seeing juveniles as young as 12 arrested for crimes like this. And so when residents have a chance to speak with city officials about, hey, what are we going to do about this? It's your job to, enforce the law and protect the community. Well, D.C. Attorney General Brian Schwalb yesterday, not giving the most comforting or reassuring answer. Here's what he had to say to outraged citizens.
We as a city and a community need to be much more focused on prevention and surrounding young people and their families with resources if we want to be safer in the long run. We cannot prosecute and arrest our way out of it.
Really? How about you try that? I mean, everybody gets let off through this revolving door. Maybe you get charged, if that, and then you're back out on the street ready to commit other crimes. We've seen it in many other cities as well, though. So, Jim, this seems like not the best strategy here, because usually strict law enforcement is kind of the way to reduce these crimes.
It is. There is, obviously, that was the lesson of the 1990s. That was the lesson of broken windows policing up in New York City under Giuliani and Bratton. Most cities, although not Washington, D.C., practiced some version of that during that time period. Crime went down. And I would argue that the entire effort of criminal justice reform and more leniency, dare we say, in dealing with criminals only was possible because the crime rates came down. And that only after a long period of low crime are people willing to re-examine whether the criminal justice system is fair or puts people on the right path. I think there's a legitimate argument in there. This is why I've supported things like anti-recidivism programs. Those who are, at least, many of the groups who are supportive of that are quick to emphasize anti-recidivism programs are not lesser punishments. They are not systems in which you are putting people behind bars for shorter periods of time, or the fines are lower, or you're not prosecuting. So this is all about, once someone has been convicted of a crime and they go to prison, how do you maximize the odds that they do not end up going back to prison because they've committed other crimes? This is, programs to help people get GEDs. This is programs to help people job placement, mentorships, drug treatment programs, all the kinds of, it used to be called, in a lot of jurisdictions, it's called the Department of Corrections. And the aim is to help correct people's bad behavior, not just keep them behind bars and then, send them back on the street after, a lot stronger and a lot tougher because they've spent time in prison. Now, having said that, with all of this going on here, all of these ideas, look, if you want to create a youth mentoring program or more family resources or help kids stay, hey, that's all great. That's all fine. But none of that is going to have an effect on crime today or tomorrow, or my guess is not in much of an effect for quite a few years to now to come. You have a crime problem, particularly a carjacking problem, here in the Washington, D.C. right now. So the question is, what are you, the D.C. Attorney General, going to do about it? And what is your plan to start making changes, ideally now, and if not now, in the coming weeks, in the coming months, certainly by the end of the year? Your job is not to say, hey, I've got a really good plan, but you're not going to see the full effects until 2035. Well, that's nice. I'm always a fan of long-term planning, but that's not good enough when the problem is a crime wave. You can't tell people, look, you're going to see dividends in about a decade or now. That's just not the way city officials work. That's not you're judged by what have you done lately and what are you doing now. And right now, DC government, after a lot of years of up and down, but more down than up, and a lot of incompetence, you could argue whether it's worse than the Marion Barry years.
Yeah, that's the last time the murder rate was that bad, and carjackings were nowhere near that bad at that point. And it's an interesting comparison, but I'm sure, Jim, you remember the Allen Iverson practice rant from years and years ago. We're not talking about the game, we're talking about practice. And then eventually, one of the reporters said, "Well, don't you think you would make your team better by going to practice?" Like, how am I going to make my teammates better by going to practice? Which is an absurd statement, because that's exactly how you get better at anything. But that's basically what the D.C. Attorney General here is saying, is like, prosecution and arrest? Why would I do that? I mean, how's that going to make anything better? Trust me. It's going to make stuff better if you actually throw the book at some of these people. It's going to send the message that they're not going to get turned right back out onto the street. It makes a huge difference.
Greg, back when Washington, D.C. had, the label, the murder capital of the world, mm-hmm. There were those who argued that it was because, there were just so many within the district, and who argued that actually, no, if you go by per capita, other cities actually would score higher. I believe this is why we've always needed a playoff system to determine the murder capital of the world. But then again, when you're talking about practice, I suppose that's the equivalent of the Mora playoffs. Exclamations of circumstance. We exclaim because that's all we can do in the wave of a crime wave and prosecutors who aren't doing their jobs.
No, absolutely mind-boggling, and good for the people of D.C. showing up and making it obvious that they are not going to tolerate this. So hopefully the message gets through. It certainly didn't last night, though. Quick exit here, Jim. I got a text from my wife that is a little bit disturbing about the similarities between 2020 and 2024. Obviously a leap year. It's Biden versus Trump, and it's Niners versus Chiefs. If that's as far as the similarities go, and we're not all housebound for months at a time, I think I'd probably live with it. But the parallels are curious and a little bit disturbing.
Yeah, because otherwise this is the good part of the year. So this is, I mentioned this in today's Morning Jolt because I was addressing this question. It feels like a rerun, and I just thought it'd be good to have a column about all the things that have changed since 2020. Obviously, there's not a pandemic going on. Knocking on wood. Hey, everybody feeling good over at Wuhan Institute of Virology? Anybody trip? Anybody sneeze? No? Yeah. The economy is in a different, very different issue. The border is a much bigger issue right now. Obviously, inflation, all kinds of things have had a big effect. Trump's a different guy than he was 3 years ago. Biden's a very different guy than he was 3 years ago. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., I think, is a X factor, depending on how many states he can get on the ballot. No Labels is out there with a candidate to be named later. So you look at all that stuff. And so it's probably not the same. But I noticed that, we had a Republican a caucus out in Iowa. The Democrats were having a mail-in vote. And I don't know how well they're counting the votes. We're not going to know until March 5th.
Yes, Iowa's been demoted. Oh, I just remembered that the last time DC had a huge murder problem, their solution was to change the name of the NBA team. So they weren't the Bullets anymore. That was really effective.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm not a huge fan of the Wizards name. And the fact that Dragons were also one of the 5 finalists made me think that Robert Byrd had something to do with it. That's a deep cut right there. Anyway.
Things can only get better, I hope. Jim, have a good Thursday. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Please subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch if you don't already. Tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He is at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a terrific Thursday and join us again on Friday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.